Hi, I'm Dan. Welcome to Legacy of a Miniature. On this episode, we're going to be looking at the Chapter Master of the Blood Angels, Commander Dante. In this series, we'll be looking at various characters from the Warhammer 40,000 universe and seeing how those characters have progressed since their first inception of the franchise, as well as looking at how the models for these characters have evolved too. Allow me to introduce myself properly though. I'm Dan, I've been playing Warhammer for over 15 years. I've played nearly every game that Games Workshop has released, but my first introduction to the game was with their sci-fi classic, Warhammer 40,000, or 40k as it's more commonly called, and I'll probably end up calling it throughout this video. When I first started getting into the hobby, I found myself looking at all the various factions that were available, and like many, I found myself instantly drawn to Space Marines. Their armour and their guns look really cool, as well as tanks like Land Raiders and Rhinos were just all so exciting to the mind of my 10-year-old self. They were really the army that made me go, I want to play this game. I spent a lot of time looking at all of the characters available for Space Marines, and I realised that there was more than just Ultramarines available. I saw Dark Angels and Space Wars and of course Blood Angels. They stood out to me for multiple reasons really though. One being quite simply because I liked the colour red, still do. I have quite a big Blood Angels army to this day. And another reason though was that I liked one particular character. Commander Dante. Compared to all the other characters I saw, Dante stood out for multiple reasons. For one, he was wearing gold armour, and as a 10-year-old with no idea about the lore of the game or what characters could wear or not wear, it really interested me that I could have a character that truly stood out compared to what the rest of my army would look like. Having this one golden warrior in the sea of red Space Marines just really intrigued me, and I liked the idea of that. I could always see where he was on the board, basically, when I was playing. I also really liked that from a lore perspective, he wasn't considered a chapter master. He was a commander. From what I saw, there was basically no other named character I'd seen with a title anywhere near the same as commander. There was Marnius Calgar, who was a chapter master, and there was Azrael, who was the Grand Master of the Dark Angels, but Dante stood alone with the title of commander. Even to this day, when looking at the new characters and everything in the game, Dante still only shares the title of commander with two other named characters in the game, and they're both in Tau. So it really makes that title that he has sound really individual and helps him stand out in a game full of all these awesome heroes that exist. To move on to the actual subject of this video about Dante, I should probably explain a little bit more about him, to be fair, and maybe introduce him too. Dante is the chapter master of the Blood Angel Space Marine chapter, one of the oldest chapters in the existence of Space Marines as a whole, and one of the original 18 Space Marine legions from the time of the Horus Heresy. He is one of, if not the oldest, Space Marine who is not a dreadnought, and has truly stood the test of time as one of the most popular characters within the 40k setting and amongst Space Marine fans as a whole. Dante was first introduced to the 40k universe in 1996 with the release of the second edition codex called Codex Angels of Death. This codex actually served to expand the lore of both Blood Angels and Dark Angels in the same book, believe it or not, and it actually introduced us to a lot of key characters that still exist to this day, but we'll save those for another video for another time. We're going to focus just on Dante today. Dante is introduced to us as one of the most experienced and able Space Marine commanders in the galaxy, which is in no short part due to the fact he's been leading the chapter for over 1100 years. And whilst I've not been able to find any direct sources that state this number has changed at all, it probably is somewhere in the region of 12 to 1500 years at this point. And in comparison to some of his peers, it really shows how long he's been going for. For example, Logan Grimnar of the Space Wars is known to be around 500 years old-ish, and by estimations, Marnius Calgar, chapter master of the Ultramarines, is somewhere in the region of 300 to 400 years old. So it really shows truly how much of a veteran chapter master Dante is at this point. In the overly long time that he's been the chapter master of the Blood Angels, he's achieved a lot of things. During the Second War of Armageddon, he was chosen by the other Imperial forces, including multiple Space Marine chapter masters who were in attendance, to be the supreme commander of all the Imperial forces due to his experience. And he oversaw victory against the Orcs that were attacking the planet in that campaign. And spoiler alert, the Orcs try again and they do lose, but we'll probably cover that another time. We don't need to embarrass them again. He also, in more recent history, led the Blood Angels, as well as a lot of their successor chapters, to successfully defend their home planet of Baal from an invading hive fleet of Tyranids. though he did get a lot of help in the process from other Space Marines who turned up towards the end, and demons and all sorts of stuff, and he almost died in the process. Lastly, he's one of the few, if only, characters so far to have met both of the returned Loyalist Primarchs, and they've both treated him with the highest level of respect because of his position. Guilliman going as far as calling him an equal amongst his peers and giving him control of half of the Imperia because of his veterancy and his experience. If that doesn't really show you kind of how important a character he is to the universe as a whole, I don't know what does at this point. But with that, I think we've covered nearly everything that there is to know about Dante, and I feel like at this point we can take a look at both of his miniatures that have come out, and we can paint them up to see how they stand against each other.
Firstly, let's take a look at the old Commander Dante model. This model was first released in 1996 alongside the codex he was introduced to us in, Codex Angels of Death, as previously mentioned. He was released in pewter metal, as most models were within that time period, but this particular example I have in front of me is made of fine cast resin. I've already gone through the process of building and priming this miniature before filming this video, as I wanted to show its full size in comparison to the new model. The model's initial height comes in at 2.1 inches, but with the increased sizing due to the basing, he now stands at 2.45 inches and stands on a 32mm base, although originally the model comes with a 25mm slot-in base. I've sized up his base to make the model more in line with the base sizes of Space Marine models today, which besides exceptions generally come with 32mm bases as standard. Moving him to one side and replacing him with the new model shows us something very different. This new Commander Dante model was released in 2023 alongside the campaign book series in 9th edition called Arcs of Omen, which brought us Primaris versions of a couple of characters as well as the return of some bigger characters to the 40k universe. Once again, I have already built and primed this model in preparation for painting, but I really wanted to show the difference in just how big this model is compared to its predecessor before I cover it in more paint. This model stands at a mighty 2.9 inches tall in comparison, and stands on a 50mm base which comes standard with the model. Lining both of these miniatures up really shows the dramatic difference between them and how the game strives to show characters as the centerpieces of armies that they should be. But before I get too much into the realms of comparison though, I think it's about time we gave them a nice paint job. So, I started off by painting over the gold primer in another layer of Retributor armour so that I could cover all the nooks and crannies I may have missed with priming and to give a consistent coat before I moved on to other layers. Then, I followed this up with a wash of Reikland Flesh Shade, and after letting it dry, I followed up with 2 dry brushed layers, one of Auric Armour, and then followed up with another layer of Liberator Gold, and each layer being a little bit more focused on certain highlights than others. I find it gives a really nice dry brushed gold effect on the armour, and I really like how it looks when it's done well. After painting the gold, I then moved on to painting the areas which would be black, such as the recesses in the armour as well as other parts of the model. To achieve this, I started with a layer of Abaddon Black, followed by a more broad highlight of Eshin Grey, and then I finished with a sharper highlight of Dawnstone to really help that colour pop just a little bit more. And as you can see, here's what they look like after the layers of gold and black have been done. You can see the gold looks like this really nice brushed effect that I was talking about before, and the highlights on the blacks really help them pop, especially on the shoulder pads right there. At this point, I was going to start with the areas that would be white on the model, but I decided I'd first fill out the shoulder pads, as they were going to be red, and I wanted to complete that before I started on the white, especially with the large Blood Angels icon on the left shoulder pad too. It'd be easier for me to fix my mistakes of the white than it would be if I'd done it with the red afterwards. For this, I simply covered the shoulder pads in a layer of Mephiston red, and then afterwards I did a recess shade of a 3-to-1 mix, personally, that I did with Mephiston red and Abaddon black. And once all the red was complete, I decided to then move on to the white, as I said before. And for all that various white filigree on the models, such as chapter icons and the winged skulls on their ankles, I started off with a layer of Celestra Grey, and then I highlighted up with a layer of Ulthuan Grey, kind of filling out those larger, flatter areas where I could. I could have gone with a white highlight to finish here, but ended up deciding against it, as I felt that the colour came out exactly how I wanted it to, without having to add any more layers to it, luckily enough. Once all the whites had dried, at this point I decided to move on to what I thought was the last of probably the more main colours on the model, which was the metallics. I decided for this I was not going to do the weapons at the same time as I did the rest of the metallics, as I kind of wanted to cover the weapons last as they were on the extremities of the model. And so to do this I just started with a base coat of lead belcher, and then I followed it up with a wash of Nuln Oil. I really like the darkened colour that it gives, and I find just sometimes the lead belcher and the wash on its own really just adds a lot to it without having to do a whole lot of work. But I did finish with quite a bright highlight of Stormfang Silver on the extreme areas, and it really just helps those edges pop, I find, when I'm painting metals. Unfortunately, I had some technical issues at this point, so I can't actually show you the rest of the painting process, I'm afraid. To cut a long story short, a memory card failed, and whilst I didn't lose any footage, I wasn't able to grab any more until after the project was finished. I personally am going to blame it on agents of the Chaos Gods trying to stop me from getting this video completed, but after burning some heretics, buying a new memory card, and praying to the God Emperor, I bring you 2 completed Commander Dantes. And here they both are, finished and ready for battle. Already from these models we can see plenty of key resemblances between them, as well as some important changes. The axe for me is one part that really shows the comparison between these two models. A model that has grown in size basically in every way. Everything about the new model has been sized up from the original in a really comparable yet transformative way, I feel. Everything we know and love about the 1996 model is present on the 2023 model, but it's quite simply bigger. The only changes between the two in terms of new things added would be the loincloth at his waist and a large pillar that the new model is stood on. These two changes are things that don't particularly change much about the model, but give it added presence and status when on the tabletop. In my eyes, it's a fitting upgrade for my favourite character in the game.
So there you have it. 2 great models representative of their time, and both equally great sculpts in my opinion. Dante has really stood the test of time for me in this game, and I think his models have really shown great evolution whilst also keeping to the overarching themes of the original sculpt itself. Let me know in the comments though what you think as well, and maybe what characters I should maybe look at doing in the future. I'd really be interested in hearing what you have to say. For now though, I hope you enjoyed this episode of Legacy of a Miniature, and I'll see you next time.